So again, I want to warmly welcome you and officially welcome you to this Second Tuesday webinar for September. Hard to believe we're already in the month of September in this year of, I was going to say the year of COVID, the year of 2021, second year of COVID, I guess. I am coming to you, zooming into you from the traditional lands of the Suquamish people. Commonly, our mailing address is Bainbridge Island, Washington. It's a little island west of Seattle, 35-minute ferry boat away. And it is almost autumn. We are 8 days before autumn, 8 days and an hour, literally, before the autumnal equinox. And so I thought it fitting that today our topic would be transitions, and I'm going to talk about what transitions are, give a few examples, and then open it up for discussion. I'll give you a brief introduction of myself just by way of being a little bit formal as I open this up. I am a spiritual ecologist. If you want to know more about that, that's 100 hours worth of conversation that we can have some other time, or I can refer you to things I've written if you're interested in that topic. I've been researching, experiencing, writing about, guiding others through this notion of the inner-outer landscape for more than 30 years in so many different ways. It's evident in my books, it's evident in blog posts, photographs I take, nature journaling that I do. Everything I do is focused on this relationship that we inherently have as human beings, as members of natural communities. Though it's easy to forget that we are part of the natural world. And so my work has been to maybe obsessively remind us all, myself and the world of people that I'm exposed to, that we are connected in ways that we can deepen that connection, sacralize that connection, and just be present with what is going around us in the natural world, which I feel does make us more whole and does kind of nourish us and fortify us for the things in life that might be a little more challenging or difficult. I'm a longtime hospice volunteer, so I can't help it but bring things like death and grief and loss into all of the work I do, and that will be one transition that that I'll talk about briefly today and as a transition. And my Teal Arbor Stories work, the mentorship I do, is really at the intersection of compassionate ecology, creativity, healing, and the peace and justice movements, which also includes interfaith work. So let's move into defining transition very, very, very briefly. The dictionary, any one you might want to choose, it's your favorite, basically defines transitions as the process or a period of changing from one state or condition to another. So the process or period, so what is actually unfolding, or a time frame associated with that. I could probably add a lot of components to that definition, but we'll just stick with that one for now, kind of bare bones. So what I would invite you to do, so that you have kind of a tether to your own life, transition in your own life, as I offer a few examples and details of transition and why should we care about transitions? Why is it worth spending an hour of our Tuesday talking about transitions? I would like for you to just, if you're comfy, close your eyes. If you're not, just maybe avert your gaze from the screen. We're just going to spend a minute or two doing this, so this won't be a big deal. But just first of all, feel your breath. Just take a nice, nourishing inhalation and exhalation at your own pace. Feel yourself in your chair, where your feet meet the floor, whatever part of you or part of the chair, whatever surface your hands are touching. Just become present to yourself. And without thinking too much about it, but just sort of feeling your way in, see if you can bring up a couple of transitions from your own life. Could be current, could be past. Moments of change, periods of change, processes of change for you. And as you watch these kind of go past the screen of your mind, see if you can pull out one, select one that feels compelling or energizing or juicy or difficult. What was that? What was or is that transition you're going to carry with you through the next hour? When was that transition? Were there any surprises that came out of that time for you? And perhaps most importantly, what was the impact of that transition on you or for you? Turn to your breath. Take a few more inhalations and exhalations. Remember that this is safe space that we share. And when you feel comfortable, come back to the room, to the Zoom room. And I do hope that if you chose something that is very tender for you, that you will care for yourself now, this hour, and after this webinar. There are so many transitions. I might say that all of living, being alive, is a big transition. You know, we look for the stasis, we look for the steady state. So often it feels like the safe place to be in our lives, the things that are the same, the things that are routine. But truly, we are just crazy in motion fluid beings. Our bodies in every moment are in some kind of transition, maybe digesting food, maybe waiting for food to be put in to energize us, various states of fatigue or awakeness during the day, just being alive, being present here. We are just in movement, constant movement, right? Well, let's look at some transitions outside of us, seemingly outside of us, to kind of grab on a little deeper to what is transition. So the very obvious one that isn't COVID, I thought about bringing COVID into today, but that we're all just so aware of this, right? So I'm not going to specifically talk about COVID, but that is a huge transition that we're in, all of us together globally. No one is escaping this one, right? We're all subject to COVID and what's happening. So we're not going to talk about that explicitly, but let's talk about the other one, which is, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, the Autumnal Equinox, which is on its way. It is marching right in. Here in this area where I live, where Dan lives, we have seen the sky get cloudier. We've seen the nights lengthen. We've seen the temperatures drop. All of this in very recent weeks. I noticed as I have a long dirt driveway on this property where we live, and it takes driving at the safe pace for all the animals that live on the property. It takes a minute or two to get all the way up the driveway to where we park our vehicles. And as I came up, as I was at the very bottom, I looked at a distance at the tree line I could see on the other edge of the property, the far side of the property. And I could see that the alder trees, which are a deciduous tree in this area, the red alder, Rubra is a Latin name for this one, is still green with this beautiful white and gray and mottled bark. But it also, I'm looking out the window at the very one I saw, has some yellow, some golden yellow just around the edges. And I was imagining a child's drawing of a tree, you know, as a friend of mine said yesterday, a lollipop tree, the kind we might have drawn when we were little, that have the circle ball of the foliage and then kind of a stick. And for people like me, imagining apple trees, I don't know why, because there weren't really a lot of apple trees around where I grew up. We had orange trees, but for some reason, red dots always went on that lollipop tree, and those were the apples. When I saw that tree, when I saw that transition of the deciduous trees on the edge of my property the other day turning yellow, I imagined taking a crayon in my child's mind, or maybe some paint today, or a special kind of marking pen that's yellow, and just making a yellow circle around the green lollipop tree, right? That is exactly how this alder tree looked, as if somebody had carefully crafted a yellow outline almost all the way around the foliage of this tree. I've been watching the trees. We're in a drought this summer. We've had a huge drought, and we've had some record-breaking weather in our area. And we all know we're in climate change. There's also a transition I'm not going to talk about. We are so in the thick of that. But I was noticing earlier in the summer how a little maple tree, a baby maple, I want to call it a vine maple, but it has some other, it's not a native tree. It's kind of a visitor, kind of an ornamental, but it's here planted near where I live. And it usually doesn't yellow until about now, when the alder trees yellow. But because of the drought, it started yellowing very early, maybe in July. I noticed the first yellow leaves at the top of the tree. Now that we're in autumn, I can embrace that a little more as an autumnal change, and feel a little bit better about it. But I truly know that that tree in particular has been a little subject to the drought. So these transitions, they unfold leaf by leaf, a few temperatures, degrees difference at a time, right? It didn't suddenly get to be 50 degrees at night. We had to move down into the 70s and then down into the 60s, right? For a few days at a time, or a few degrees at a time. And then there are the fluctuations where maybe it gets warm again for a few days, or we have a warmer night. And so as these transitions, for example, the season change unfolds, it is gradual. There are little moments, and where we decide as humans who might care about transition, where we place our attention can help us experience life a little more richly, a little more deeply, a little more attentively and presently. And so when I'm noticing some other fruit tree that was planted by my neighbor over there has some orange leaves on it, I can see, oh, today there are actually, I'll say a dozen, it's hard to tell from here, a dozen orange leaves on that little sapling. It's still a sapling, it's only about 5 feet tall. The rest of the leaves now, though, that aren't orange are no longer green. They're no longer spring green, and they're no longer the green of summer. They're now the green of fall, which means little by little, there is some yellow creeping in. If you've picked up a fall leaf recently, or in prior seasons, you might notice the little flecks of color. You know, when we get a little bit closer to a transition, we can see some of those details a little more carefully. It's also harvest season. I, for the first time, decided to grow tomatoes this year, only because someone offered me a few tomato plants. It took me 5 minutes to make the salsa from the first batch of tomatoes, but it took 11.5 weeks for those tomatoes to grow. So I was thinking about calling it 5 minute and 11.5 week salsa. The way the tomatoes have ripened has been really interesting to me, watching them up close and then trying to decide, is it red enough to actually pluck it from the vine or not? Do I pick it when it has a little more orange and then let it ripen the rest of the way on my kitchen counter so that it doesn't split open? Or do I wait until it has the little crack where it really looks like it's just about had enough of this growing business and is ready to be consumed? Turning now to a different kind of transition. I don't know how many of you have been present for a death of an animal, death of a loved one, death of a stranger, even perhaps. But that process, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about that now, but just to note that if you have ever been in the presence of a human or non-human, or even a plant, that is in the dying process, we see too how that unfolds bit by bit. As a hospice volunteer for a very, very long time, of course, I've seen a lot of this, experienced a lot of it, and like you, perhaps have also had loved ones who have passed with whom I've been present. And that way that people who are dying begin to detach from, I want to say, worldly things, detaching from the world, their circle gets smaller in many cases. The focus becomes on, daily survival, whether I'm eating or taking medication or receiving some kinds of palliative care or hospice care treatment. Beloveds, our intimates, become much more a focal point at that end of life time. Maybe there's less consumption of food or a narrowing of the kinds of foods that we consume. This focus then starts turning toward the inevitable unknown, whether or not someone has a spiritual practice or a faith tradition that that has them reaching towards something kind of tangible for them in the afterlife. There is still that unknown piece, right? None of us have died until we die. And so that time is so rich with opportunities to embrace the little tiny things that are happening, the little tiny things that are unfolding. I know from my mother, it just so happened she was passing away at this time of year, in the end of October 3 years ago. And every day when I drove, she was in a place at the end far away from where I live, so it took about an hour and a half to get there. I was driving, seeing the fall leaves and watching the fog come in, and other kinds of things that happen around here in this climate at this time of year. And my mom loved fall. She also loved spring, but she loved fall. And so I was able to bring in leaves in various states of decay or with various color schemes going on, leaves that some of them looked like they'd been painted by an artist, and my mom had been a painter and artist. And so it gave us a way to really connect deeply, and also gave us a way to have a conversation about those things that were happening for her. Taking another example, one that maybe isn't so poignant, a little easier to digest maybe than the death of a loved one, is this notion of collage. And I don't know how many of you in this webinar have ever made a collage, but I have made some. I've made a few. Collage is a process too. For me, it involves figuring out what the substrate is going to be. What am I going to mount this thing on? It might be a heavy piece of some kind of specialty paper. It might be cardboard. Sometimes it's a piece of wood, sometimes bark that I find in the yard, right? Gathering the materials. So that's part of the process. Figuring out what surface this collage is going to appear on, and what size, what shape, right? I might also have a notion of outcome. I'm kind of the creative person who doesn't always have a clear idea of what's going to happen with my creativity. I'm not sure sometimes what the outcome's going to be, especially with collage, but I like to gather the materials that feel good, that feel interesting, that maybe are pretty, that maybe don't go together in some other kind of context, but which I want to try to see the pattern of together. And then sometimes those materials take some preparation, right? After I've gathered them, or some manipulation. For example, flowers that I might press for a week or a few days or something before I actually put them into a collage. Cutting things, shaping things. Then once those materials are prepared, gathered and prepared, then there is that placement of the objects. Where are they going to go on this piece of paper or this piece of wood? You know, am I going to layer them? Or some going to show in their entirety? Or some going to overlap? How's this going to be? Is it going to be something that is abstract, or is it going to be something that is sort of, that we can sort of tell what it is? Here's a very quick collage I made at a retreat I offered a few months ago, actually spring, the vernal equinox. I had a half-day retreat, and we made these torn paper collages. So I took a lot of, to me, beautiful pieces of homemade paper. Some I had made, some other people made, and I put them together in a semi-landscape kind of formation. But I didn't know that at the moment. I just grabbed the paper and prepared the materials. And then once I figured out where I think those things are going to go, then I need to use some kind of adhesive to keep them together so that they're cohesive, so that they cohere into a collage. And so that's a process with a lot of parts, a lot of decisions. Sometimes after I glue something, I think, oh, I didn't wait long enough in the placement stage. I wish I hadn't put that thing quite right there. I've done sometimes a little bit of ripping off of the collage and repositioning things. But it's a process, and with each touch of the texture, of the materials and the texture, and looking at the color and seeing how things create something anew out of the pieces, right? Disparate pieces of something, different colors, different shapes, and all of a sudden, you know, a little bit of peach and a little bit of white become a cloud. I didn't think about that at the beginning. It just sort of happened. And so we can find novelty in transition too. We can see how something new can come out of transition, not just the expected outcome. It's going to be fall, and the leaves are going to turn some colors, and then they're going to fall. And then around here, the evergreen trees will be really pronounced, because I have been paying attention in recent weeks to the colors on the deciduous trees, right? In the winter, the fir trees are it. They're my staple tree because they're evergreen. And so that where we place our attention, where we find the beauty, and where we can constitute something new, a new insight, a new piece of healing for ourselves, a new bit of healing. This is all something that transitions can offer us if we slow down and attend a little bit to the transitions as they unfold. And so I'm asking you again, like I do practically every webinar, to attend to the beauty of the details, because that's where we find the riches, I think. So transitions allow us to focus on things in bits, pieces of paper for a collage, differences in capacity for someone who might be dying, changes in precipitation or weather as the season progresses. It teaches us, they teach us, transitions teach us how to pay attention in a detailed way. And they offer us an opportunity to attend, perhaps in a ritualistic or sacralized way. And if you've been with me for prior webinars, or if you've looked at my books, you'll see that I am pretty big on marking things with ritual. And so every new year, end of the year, new year, so sometimes on New Year's Eve, sometimes on New Year's Day, sometimes both, sometimes right at the midnight hour, though it at this stage of the game with my gray hair, I'm staying up less and less for the turn of the new year. But doing some kind of ritual to mark that. I remember one year, some years ago, when we were living in California briefly, I took some 2-colored stones and I alternated the colors of stones in the backyard, and I created that. The one color of the stone was for the year that was just finishing out, and the other color of the stone was for the year that was coming. And then I decorated that wreath on the ground by a tree, with a lot of flowers and plants that happened to still be blooming. It was California, so things were still very much blooming in December. And I took those items and arranged them. And then the next day went out on New Year's Day and actually created a little bit more ritual and moved things around and took a candle and just sort of spent time there, reflecting on the year past, reflecting on the year to come. There are many, many ways that we can honor the tiny transitions. Something with, for example, with autumn, so simple, going out and looking at the ground, I was out walking with a friend, hiking actually with a friend a little while ago, in the nearby forest, and noticing all the colors and gradations of color of leaves from the alders. I mean, that's just one tree. It doesn't count the maples and the many other trees around here that actually turn color this time of year. And so a very simple ritual might be to take the different colors of leaves, from really green leaves that are still primarily green to really yellow leaves or orange leaves, and putting them maybe in a circle in the sequence of that gradation of color. Something so simple that can help us just for a moment be present with that transition in those small ways. So here are 3 takeaways, and I'm going to turn the camera off and open this up for discussion. So transition, in my humble opinion, is the norm, not the exception. We are fluid, dynamic beings. We are in transition. It doesn't mean that we can't anchor ourselves in some steadiness, whatever that looks like for you. It might be spiritual practices, it might be rituals or daily routines with a partner or spouse. It might be how we lay our hands upon the earth every morning when we first wake up. Doesn't matter what it is, just remembering to find the steady place in all of that movement, in all of that fluidity. And also making sacred the transitions that we face is a way of honoring our inextricable interconnection. That's a phrase from my Writing on the Landscape book, with all of life. Because we are, whether we recognize it or not, whether we say it or not, whether we want to like it or not, we are interconnected, one with another, and one with another of the landscapes and climates and floral and faunal members of our communities. And finally, attending to the details of transitions as they occur, allows us to process those changes at the pace of a natural being, our human beingness. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop the recording altogether.